right, we are on part 2 of live streaming. So in our first part, we talked about what kind of cameras. We talked about the advantages of manned cameras versus PTZ cameras. But now you have cameras, at least one, maybe 2, 3, 4, whatever. And you need to bring them together into what we would commonly call a program feed. That's the feed that's going to go to the live stream. And there's a couple different options out there right now.
Yeah, I would say we could narrow it down to, do you want to use a computer or do you want to use some sort of external, hardware?
Yeah, that's a great point. ProPresenter 7 has brought about a new era of opportunity. So if you're using the ProPresenter platform, which I'd say about 80% of our churches are, there is now a new technology in ProPresenter where you can bring video sources in and you can route them out. Now, it's not plug and play. You need to know some programming.
Sure.
Or you need to work with a company like ours to set it up and help you understand the programming.
If you wanted to stay on the really cheap route and use a computer, you could go OBS.
Yep, that was the original that we all were doing.
Yeah, a lot of churches do that. That's free. It's an open source. Just know that
it's gonna have some.
It's very DIY.
Yeah, you need to do some adjusting.
Yeah.
Again, not out of the box.
No, there's lots of settings and all that kind of stuff. And so basically what we're doing here is we're taking a video source, whether it's one camera or multiple cameras, and we're bringing it into a computer to be able to send it off to the internet.
Yeah, and typically we want to be able to switch between our camera shots.
Yeah.
So I will say this about Pro 7, I would only do it with up to 2 cameras. If you think you're going to use more than 2 cameras, I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but I think you're going to end up with a lot more headaches. But let's say you're a very simple church and you had 1 or 2 cameras. You could bring them in. There's HDMI to USB capture cards you can use, or Blackmagic makes some really nice HDMI or SDI to USB-C capture cards. And then they have a very special line called the DeckLink, which we're using in a lot of churches when we're needing to do complex routing in and out. So DeckLink, like a DeckLink Duo, allows you to have 4 SDI sources connected to your computer. They can be inputs or outputs. So we did one church where we brought 2 cameras in, and we also had 2 outputs going out. One output was going to the projectors, and one output was going to the live stream encoder. Yeah. So that'd be a great setup for that. And inside ProPresenter, then you can bring your cameras in as different shots. You can switch between them on your program feed. You can put your lower thirds, lyrics, and everything in ProPresenter. It's cool. You need a pretty beefy computer to do it. It's going to be a lot of processing power. And
that is a big concern.
You need to be pretty technically savvy to get it set up, or you're going to need to hire a company like ours.
Yeah.
What's the big advantage of an ATEM then, a hardware switcher?
So imagine if you didn't have to do any of that stuff. Let's just pretend in this world here, this scenario, that you had 2 cameras and a computer, and if you just had some sort of little box that you could just plug in the computer, plug in the camera, and you could push buttons, and it would
switch between it.
Magically go to the internet. That's what is possible.
Wait, it's magic?
Yeah, and there's I feel like we're talking about Blackmagic quite a bit, and we're not sponsored by Blackmagic.
No. There are other companies that build these as well. We've just had really good luck with their gear.
So if you had an ATEM Mini Pro, they're not expensive.
Yep.
And you can bring them all in, and you can take your wired Ethernet jack, your wired connection, plug it in, and there you go. That's literally all you need. You have to set up a few things, but it's very basic. This is very, very basic stuff.
And the ATEM is very plug and play. Like you connect your cameras and anybody can just hit a source, cut, and it cuts to it.
Yep.
And on the extremes, I highly recommend getting the extreme versions now. And
extreme is another version of it. It's a little bit bigger.
It's bigger. And the biggest thing they added on the HDMI version is you got 2 outputs. Because typically when you're bringing a lot of video sources in, you need something called a multi-view. Basically, it's just a monitor view of all the different sources you're bringing in. So on an extreme HDMI, they finally added it. On the SDI version, on any of the SDI versions, you get multiple outputs, so it's not as big of a deal. But on the HDMI version, only the extreme has that. And so we'll typically buy like a 27-inch monitor. It doesn't need to be a fancy monitor.
No, just a regular monitor.
Connect it to it, and we'll set it up as multi-view, so then you can see all your camera shots. Go back to our other discussion about PTZs. If you have one operator, this is how we set up a lot of our churches.
Yeah.
They have one video operator who in a lot of times is running ProPresenter, switching their camera feeds, and running their PTZ cameras. it's doable. That's a lot for one person to juggle, but it is doable. And with the multi-view, they can see their camera shots as they're setting them up, and then they can cut to them to send them to the program feed. And the whole thing can be very easy to mix together. But there are software and hardware options. It's just important to think about what do you want your workflow to look like.